I'd like to start to introduce our panellists. So our first panellist is David Emerson from the Collingwood Football Foundation. David runs up the Magpie Nest program, which is in partnership with Salvation Army, and it's absolutely an integral part of what we do here. So it started, I believe, with the Magpie Nest housing program. It's extended to the cafe that we have downstairs, a dedicated women's worker, an annual Christmas event, an annual football finals event, and it's incredible to see the work that Collingwood does in the community. We then have Councillor Beverly Pinder from the City of Melbourne. Beverly supports an incredible number of projects and initiatives in the City of Melbourne, including our night cafe, which is funded by the City of Melbourne, and our Street Teams program, which reaches out to young people enjoying a night in the city who have become vulnerable throughout the night. Our next panellist is Angie. Angie is a resident of our Salvation Army Magpie Nest housing program. Angie is an absolute delight to have around, whether it's her dancing at our community choir or her work that she does with Project Respect. Angie's an incredible person.
My tin rattling.
And her tin rattling, raising money for our annual appeal. So thanks, Angie. Our next panellist is Trevor. Trevor also lives in our Salvation Army housing program, but is also an employee here. So Trevor uses his lived experience to connect with those accessing our services. Trevor started with the night shift. We have moved him to the day now, which hopefully is a bit more friendly for you, Trev. Next, we have Anthony McEvoy. Anthony has run our homelessness program for a number of years now. Anthony's got 25 years experience in the industry, including in refugee camps overseas, and in recent years running up our homelessness program. And lastly, we have Margaret Stewart from the St Vincent's Hospital. Margaret is absolutely an incredible support of what we do here and across the city. So Margaret actually assists us in having nurses based on site here every day of the week, which is absolutely incredible. And I'd like to finally introduce our moderator, Ali Moore, who's going to be hosting the night tonight and getting the discussion started. We will be opening up the event to questions at the end, so have a think of your questions throughout the event. But we're going to get started now with the panel. Welcome, and I hope you enjoy tonight's event. Thank you.
Just doing a bit of sound logistics here. Thank you very much, Phoebe. I am so extraordinarily dumb, I've just clicked as to why it's called Magpie Nest. I think I was just trying to avoid the whole Collingwood thing, but never mind, couldn't be done on this occasion. Can I add my welcome to everyone? It's terrific to have everyone here, and as Phoebe said, we will open this up to questions from the floor a little later, so please do, if you've got anything that you'd like to ask, have a good think about it. Let's jump straight in and talk about the practical realities of life that lead people to come here to the Salvos. Angie and Trevor, I very much want to hear your stories. And Angie, if I can start with you, tell us a little bit about your life and what happened to you that led you to the Salvos.
I'll try and keep it as short and informative as I can. Going back most of my life, I was independent. I've had good jobs over the years. My rental history reads like a Bible. But unfortunately, as I was getting older and my wage wasn't rising, rental increases, I had to downsize. I lived in South Yarra for 21 years, lived a good life. Like most of you in the crowd, you know, I could eat out well, catch up with friends. Travelled overseas a couple of times. Situation came, my last rental, I was there for 5 years. I downsized to a bungalow at the back of a retired couple's place. It suited me, but only just. I was on Centrelink because I was out of work at the time. So I was on $235 on Centrelink, and my rent, which luckily included the bills, but that was $200 a week. So I had $35 to live on, a very spoilt cat to feed, and unfortunately that didn't pay for my mobile phone, toiletries, the simple things we take for granted. So I did, a little bit of cash in hand jobs just to survive. I didn't know about services that could relieve the financial stress. And because I've always been independent, I didn't reach out for assistance. Then when my landlady sold to a developer, I was given 4 months' notice to find somewhere else to live. I couldn't find anything affordable. Most places were $350 just for a studio apartment. So luckily a girlfriend of mine was a social worker, and she put me on to where she was working, and that organisation put me on to the Salvation Army, which they did a couple of interviews with me for the Magpie Nest, and luckily I was accepted. So yeah, I'm in transitional housing now. I've been there for 3.5 years. It's a roof over my head. It's a very beautiful house, a very beautiful area. I can walk to the city. So it's given me safety because I had a bit of a breakdown as well because I was being stalked before I got the Magpie's Nest.
Angie, you were obviously incredibly lucky for the friend that you had in particular who had, who was a social worker. And if I can bring Anthony in here, I mean, tell me a little bit about those early connections and how hard or difficult they are. As I said, Angie had someone to point her in the right direction, but not everyone has that.
No, we actually, sometimes people find us and sometimes we find people. And it's really about making sure we get out, do assertive outreach and try and connect with people that don't know where the services are, don't commonly sort of have the confidence to maybe access the services, may not have a friend that's working in social work, those sort of things. So we really try and look. And then we mentioned those early stages, like Angie's a magnificent person who can present herself really well in her interviews. Now these interviews aren't like job interviews to get a house. What we're doing is they're discussions to try and find out who is Angie and who are these young men and women that we work with, and what we're trying to do is match them to an appropriate property so we can sort of get the best fit for a couple of people to live together. And that's what we're sort of trying to do by that. We know everyone that comes to us for a house needs a home, which is try and tailor it to the right people.
So I was going to say that the whole model, which is extraordinary, must be just an extraordinary exercise in not just logistics, but almost psychological analysis of, anyone who's lived in a shared house would know how important it is to get the right people together.
Yes, and we don't always get it right, but we sort of we have a floating, we've always decided, since day one we've had a floating waiting list, so it sort of moves around on a whiteboard and the staff can advocate for people they've met. But they don't do it blindly. They say, no, I think you're right. Simon will say, I think yours, Ashley's, is going to be a much better fit with this house, and we try and match people that way. And there's not a science to it. It's just about the Salvation Army here at 614. We have permission to develop relationships with people. It's a relational model. So we base that on sort of mateship and friendship, but it has its boundaries. It sort of used to be seen as frowned upon, but nowadays I think we can actually have a relationship with someone and not cross a boundary. So people don't come and sleep on our couches or attend our children's birthday parties, but we've got a friendship feel. Would you say that's right, Trevor and Angie? Yeah, we sort of got mateship going, and that way we're sort of batting for our mate and we're trying to get the best outcome for them. But and that's where I think the success of the program lies.
So let's just backtrack a bit for the people in the room who don't know what the Magpie Nest is, except that obviously they've probably made the connection between Collingwood and Magpie. David, Collingwood does support the project. Before I get to the logistics of the project itself, why? Because I'm interested in why you've chosen this as a cause. I bet that most people who go through Magpie Nest are not Collingwood supporters.
Well, yeah, good on you, Ange.
Of course you'd make a lie.
Not Trevor's not. Trevor's. What are you, Trev? Geelong?
Brisbane.
Brisbane Lions, that's right.
Yeah, but why? Why for Collingwood Football Club is this important?
I think it goes back to what's the purpose of our club. So, why does Collingwood exist and what are we for? A lot of people would say, to win football games or netball games, but that's only an objective. It's not what our true purpose is. So Collingwood was created in 1892. I'll take you through every year since then if you want.
No, thanks. We'll pass.
But essentially at that time, Collingwood was a slum. It was the worst suburb in Melbourne, massive unemployment, terrible place to live. And a few guys got together and said, we'll start a football club. That'll bring business and people to the district and it'll give people something, a bit of pride and hope. And Melbourne told those people that it couldn't happen. Collingwood was too poor, they'd never do it. They had a meeting in February 1892 and by May they found a ground at Victoria Park. They were the biggest club in the league and they started from there. That's why all the hotels are in Collingwood, I'm sure, because the football game started. So that was our purpose, to help people who are disadvantaged, who are vulnerable. So we try and do that today, because today it's a professional game, big business and sponsors and all those things, and we don't want to lose our identity and what we're about.
So tell us your role. My understanding is you source the properties, you get them ready, you fix them up, you put all the furniture in and you make them ready for the salvos to find the right tenants.
That's right. We fund the houses, maintain them, guarantee the rents, provide funding for the caseworkers that are so important to this. Try and do whatever we can, really.
I think one important thing to remember for David, the football club do, is about the dignified experience of moving into the property. And these guys will know that there's a budget of around $10,000 to $12,000 that gets spent on furniture. So we have beautiful, nice couches and flat screen tellies and all the nice trimmings that come with a property when you move into a new house. That's Collingwood also provide that. There are new fridges and washing machines and dishwashers, or sort of dryers, whatever's required.
All in black and white, Anthony, too.
all in black and white, but it's an important part and it helps maintain the dignity of the property.
Yeah, I think what we want to do is show people respect.
So Trevor, you live in a Magpie house,
Yep.
Magpie Nest house. What's it like?
Yeah, great. It's a lot better than living on the street, I can tell you. But yeah, I really appreciate what they've done, and it's given me a roof over my head, and it's really good.
And do you have a sense of community with those that you live with? I mean, do you do stuff together?
Oh yeah, we organise something every weekend, or most weekends, and yeah, it's good. You get a good friendship out of it too, There's people, they come and go, they might live there for a few months, some of them, and then move on, But you build a good relationship with them.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, Anthony, when people come, often they're very isolated, they're very alone, and so just by being in a house with other people really starts to give them another way of communicating with the world, if you like.
Yeah, they definitely do. And Trev, when we met Trev, he was on his own, weren't you? And someone took a mark over you, and they took a mark over Trevor's back in the park and hurt his back. And I said...
Yeah.
And we went up...
Fractured two of my ribs, I had to go to that.
Fractured your rib, sorry. It was a good mark, though. He did hold the mark. But we went up to the hospital together, and from that moment, Trev showed us an interest in the housing, and I think I was with you at the hospital for a while. We were sitting there, said, well, we can guarantee then, with the backing of the Collingwood Foundation, is to say to Trev then and there, we'd known each other, 3 or 4 hours, we sat up there together and said, you won't be homeless at the end of this appointment. Stay in a motel for a couple of days while we prepare a place for you. And then Trev ended up moving into the first property we ever opened. But the assessment was done in the park when someone took the mark over him. Then it was up at the hospital waiting room, and then in St Vincent's Hospital's ED. And that's how that relationship sort of flowed through. And we've been friends for 5 years now.
And I want to bring St Vincent's in a minute, but first of all, Trevor, we don't know your story. We don't know, how did you end up in the park?
Yeah, well, I had this job at Kodak, and I worked there for 12 years, and they closed down in Coburg, and I got a massive payout, but I've got a gambling addiction, and it didn't take long to go. And then I got another job, and This is after I got to know the Salvos, and it was in a meat factory, and I worked there for 18 months, and they closed down too. So I couldn't get another job.
Because you closed your business down.
Yeah, and so I kept volunteering here, and then all of a sudden a job opened up as a cleaner. That's how my first job here, and then after that I worked on the night cafe for a while, and then now I'm back to day shift doing cleaning and setting up events like this.
And you've made it pretty clear that living in a Magpie Nest house is a pretty good thing. Angie, what about you? Describe living there. As you said yourself, you've had a pretty comfortable life. You've lived in some pretty nice places. What's it like where you are now?
Well, as I said, it's being stable, having a routine, and even thanks to the Salvation Army, I got a job through John Holland. John Holland approached the Salvation Army and said they needed an administration assistant, office support worker, and I worked with them for 9 months on the Metro Tunnel early works, but unfortunately the engineers finished their session of stage 1, so my contract ran out in January this year, and so I'm still looking for some part-time work in that sort of area, bit of admin. So if there's anyone
there's
out
an ad
there,
for you.
please come and see me after here.
Give Angie a call. Margaret, if I can bring you in here, so much of providing help is not necessarily waiting for people to come to you, is it?
Absolutely not, Ali, no. And so our involvement here, for example, is through the provision of a nurse, a mental health nurse, and a mental health worker and a nurse every day, 5 days a week, and it's an important... We call it assertive outreach, which sounds awful, doesn't it? But it is actually a very proactive, responsive approach.
You talked to me earlier about what you call service silos. What are service silos and why are they a problem?
I think it's important for us to understand. I haven't had a long history in the healthcare sector, and so as I've come into it from a business development context, I really clearly saw that inside our huge public hospital up the hill there, what we have is a whole lot of parts of the organisation that sometimes don't speak to each other. And I met people working in this healthcare for the homeless space that in my organisation that didn't know each other, which I thought was quite curious. So over the last year and a bit, I've been trying to get our people working together in the hospital internally. One of the great things, though, is that across this beautiful city of ours, we've actually got, through the City of Melbourne, through Beverly, a service coordination project that's attempting to break down the silos between housing organisations, healthcare organisations, community organisations and their workers. I'm trying to break down 2 more service silos. I live for the day when there's no silo between Melbourne Health, Alfred Health and St Vincent's, so I'm looking forward to that, but there's one bigger one. I'm looking forward to the day when there are no funding silos.
But okay, that's an ideal world, but how would that work in practice? I mean, how, in a really practical sense, how would that happen?
I can tell you, I can give you an example from Boston. Some of us in the room here have been very lucky to have spent the last few days with Dr. Jim O'Connell. Jim is the founder and president of Boston Healthcare for the Homeless and has been since 1984. In 1984, federal government money went to the mayors because homelessness is a city problem. People sleeping on the streets, people don't like it, they go to the mayor and ask for it to be cleaned up. In Boston, as in a number of cities in the United States, a bucket load of money, millions of dollars, was thrown to the city to create a health service for rough sleepers and people who are homeless. I would like that sort of money thrown at us. There were no strings attached to that money except to create a model that worked. How they created the model that worked was to bring in the people they served and say, what do you need? That's what we need to do.
Well, let's bring in the council here, Beverly. I mean, you must have enormous sympathy, I would imagine, for that call.
I guess, Ali, we need to also understand in Australia we have 3 levels of government, and homelessness really is the responsibility of all 3 levels, particularly providing housing. The City of Melbourne that really does lead the way in Australia in respect of what we do. We've got a great, on your point of silos, the city engages with 14 different agencies and 2 major hospitals, St Vincent's of course being one and Melbourne Health the other, in coordinating and collaborating on all of the services and programs that we offer. But just to give you a bit of an idea of what the city does, keeping in mind that the city has ratepayers' money. It's not tax money. So therefore, we are confined to a certain extent to do that which our ratepayers are seeking and wanting us to also do. So as chair of the People City Portfolio, and homelessness has been one part of that, we have in our May budget, we allocated 1.9 million towards a range of services. For example, the night cafe, which Phoebe just mentioned before, 470,000 plus was allocated towards that for this coming year, and we have been supporting it for a couple of years. Further, we have allocated something like $350,000 towards support through our in-house outreach, assertive outreach program with a specialist team, and we've contracted that out to Launch Housing, which is one of our reputable agencies whom we work for, and dependable agencies whom we work with, and that provides 3 housing workers, because housing is one of the big issues. I mean, I have personal experience of that with my family as well, so I know it really well. I know that if you place someone and give them a roof above their head, that is a long way towards solving the problem. However, you've then got to ensure that there's that connectedness and perhaps also that employment, so pathways out of homelessness. So City of Melbourne, we're very, very much involved in all of that. So through our Pathways Innovation Fund, we have agreed to provide Vincent Care with $190,000 to manage and guide our grassroots initiatives. And those initiatives are those that you see, I'm sure, you know, the residents of Melbourne particularly will have seen Orange Sky, the laundry service, people coming and providing haircuts, food vans. So what we're trying to do there is with our grassroots initiatives, rather than discourage people, encourage them, but bring them under a banner and help them to deliver those services and manage those services in a far more efficient and a way in which risk is also managed. But that's very important.
I think you probably just mentioned about, 10 different services. Yeah. I lost track. And I guess, does that go to the heart of what Margaret was saying, that it's almost like we have too many people playing in this space and you spend so much money on the administration of that process? Is that right?
No, not so. No, because the administration, of course, is our City of Melbourne workers, and we work with, say, Launch Housing, Co-Health. This week we launched a mobile doctor service. And that was $200,000 towards Co-Health. The service already existed in wider Melbourne. We have provided funding for a service on Mondays. So really ensuring that the people who live on our streets have access to good quality medical care and attention, a doctor, a nurse and a mental health worker. Our funding goes really directly to the service. So at the night cafe, for example, we know that there are 170 people who come in daily for meals and asleep on the floor. And we will continue to support Brendan. I need to acknowledge Brendan, who's not here this evening.
He's stuck in Adelaide because of the storm that is soon to come here.
I also want to acknowledge Philip Archer, who's our incoming District Governor for Rotary in its centenary year next year, 2020, and Vicky Vacondios, who's on the Homelessness Advisory Committee with me, who herself has lived experience. So, we have people like that guiding us and telling us and showing us the ways or the pathways that we ought to follow as well.
Anthony, can I ask you though, just in terms of the range of services and going back to the issue of service silos, because it does go to how we fund services as well, has it become too complex? And that's not necessarily a financial question as much as one, when you look at all those services, how does Angie and Trevor work out where to go, let alone, you?
Sure. It is a complex system to navigate, and if you come into it without some guidance, you will get lost in that system. So I think entry points like ourselves and Launch Housing and Vincent Care, there is about 4 or 5 Anglicare. They're good sort of entry points, and if you step indoors into one of those buildings, no matter if you're in the right or wrong place, you will be directed on the right path. And I think that sometimes there's disputes at myself and Brendan's level. We can have debates and arguments with other agencies about how they're working in certain areas, and that happens frequently in good, healthy debate. But on the ground, I know our workers, and myself and our staff work together very well with other agencies. We sort of don't really care about the politics of the money, where it come from, or who had it or who didn't have it. It's really about the heart of the person we're working with. So we look at that person, and if we can negotiate with Launch Housing about a better outcome for them by referring them to them, or someone turns against the Salvos, so I don't want to work with the Salvos anymore, I don't like them, then we ring up Launch and say, look, this guy's fallen out of favour with us, any chance you could pick him up? And that happens on the ground. So it's just don't allow the sort of funding streams and politics to get in the way of a good service to the punter.
Margaret, talk to me about continuity of care, and you have possibly initial contact. It might even be downstairs at the Magpie Cafe. How do you maintain that? And I'll ask Anthony the same question. But how do you do that?
There are lots of ways, and I'll speak of one. And to speak of that one, I want to pick up on what Anthony just said about how you look at the person, and we have to look at our people, the people we serve, with the eyes of the heart. So not only do we have to look at them with our skill and understand what the issues are, but we have to look at them through the prism of our values. So that's how we work. And in terms of continuity of care, if there are people in our ED or in our service, we have a team who are alerted, and ALERT stands for the Assessment, Liaison and Early Referral Team. It's a multidisciplinary team who can care for our patients who are the most vulnerable on the vulnerability index. So in this case, we're talking about patients who may be homeless but may have multiple vulnerabilities. Homelessness in and of itself might not be their only issue. There can be substance abuse, there can be mental health issues, there can be alcohol addictions, you name it. Now, ALERT will take very special care through social work, through multidisciplinary teams of allied health workers, physios, occupational therapists, and then through the patient's journey, the continuity of care means if you are a homeless patient, you can come to our medical respite centre after you're discharged from the inpatient acute services building or the mental health unit, and go to our medical respite centre, which we call the cottage. And until we have services to wrap around you and a place for you to go, we will not discharge you to homelessness.
And you never turn anyone away? You're never full?
In the cottage, we're always full, but we never turn anyone away. We find a way. And that can be through the traditional housing services of which we've spoken. Not everyone needs to go to the cottage, and we take people to the cottage from other hospitals as well. One day, Ali, we'll double it in size, if not quadruple it in size.
And that's a vital resource for you, Anthony, I'm guessing.
Absolutely it is. And we were prior to our sort of partnership with St Vincent's Hospital, we had to carefully plan someone's admission to hospital before the hospitals met them. Well, we can see just from a layman's terms of someone's turning yellow, they're becoming jaundiced, they need a hospital. We think, well, when they get up there, they'll be admitted. We need to have a plan because we know some Vs won't release them back to the streets, nor do we wish them to be. So we sort of always try and present clients, unless it's a real emergency where they've been hit by something or, in real time, but we try and admit people to the hospital. We'd put them up for a presentation at the hospital with a plan of where they'll stay should they be discharged, because we feel a responsibility, as we do to many other of the city's resources, like the police or the hospital. But with the hospital, we feel that you can't just take up a bed there for the next 3 weeks with a homeless person that just hasn't got somewhere to sleep, that's been fixed and repaired and they're ready to be discharged. So we try and take that responsibility to accommodate them. And just quickly on the police, who I mentioned, but it was with police, they often, we've got a very caring and compassionate police force that do wonderful work in our city, and more officers are bringing people up to us, and the divvy van turns up and I think, who called the police? And you look around and no one did, and sure enough they're sort of helping someone out and they're bringing them in because they said they found this guy down the street sleeping, we're a bit worried about him, can you guys look after him? So we sort of try and take them, we always take them in, we never turn anyone away, but we also want the police to be able to get back to their job of policing, which is a small part of it, is what I just mentioned, but there's other jobs for them.
Angie, if you can take us back to the personal story, is there one thing, maybe a couple of things that you can, that you would call a circuit breaker that broke the cycle for you?
Finance. As I said, not being able to afford mainstream accommodation.
And then what changed all that was getting a roof over your head and an opportunity to work again.
Absolutely. And as I said, having stability, a place to call home, an address to put on my resume.
Because without that, how do you even apply for a job?
Exactly. Just having the network of the Salvation Army to build up my confidence again, because obviously that was damaged, as I said, when I was being stalked for 2.5 years. Just their support, their compassion. Yeah.
Trevor, what about you? Is there something that was a game changer for you when something that really helped you just turn out of this downward spiral that you were clearly in? Was there one thing that was a game changer?
Yeah. When I met Anthony, I'd been to Centrelink to apply for the dole after I'd been evicted, and I had no money. I was living on the streets for quite a few months, and I didn't have enough identification to get the dole. And I was telling Anthony when I was in the hospital, and he gave me $30 to go to birth deaths and marriages to get a birth certificate, and that put me on the dole. I'd already been to birth deaths and marriages, and I told him my story. This is before I knew the Salvation was here, and they wouldn't help me. I said, look, I'll give you the $30 back as soon as I get my first dole check, but they wouldn't buy into that.
So Ali, just on Angie's point about an address, we 3 months ago installed with Australia Post's help storage lockers at Salvation Army, and Dean Robertson, who's our compliance guru's here, and that also provides an address, because that's been a huge element where people aren't able to communicate with a potential employer or even get their Centrelink benefit. So that has been a really added bonus, I think, for us, and we're looking for more areas where we can actually get more storage lockers. So they're just the little things that people don't really think about,
David, let me ask you, you've obviously been involved in this project for a long time, and we've been talking a lot here about what we're doing right. What are we doing wrong?
I would like to acknowledge Beverly and the council too, who are great partners of ours. I can't speak for everyone. We're interested in private investment and what corporations can do to help. We rely very heavily on government. There are enormous opportunities by partnering with corporations and commercial organisations. We're very interested in social impact bonds and what we can do to create an investment fund that will purchase homes for homeless people. We're very interested in social enterprises that employ people. I think there are a whole range of things that the commercial world can do to help here, because governments are stretched, certainly local level. I don't want to be political, but federal government, there's no national plan for homelessness, it doesn't win votes. I don't see federal governments doing anything, but that's a separate issue, so I just jumped around a bit too much there.
Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, New Start is absolutely core to the question of why many people are in the position that they're in, is it not?
I would have thought so. But again, I think there are... necessity brings innovation, and we're really interested in how we partner with commercial organisations like Coles, who are putting in $250,000 and who are offering to employ people and doing things. There's so much you can do, but it just takes
And do you get a good hearing? Because as you started at the very start of this conversation, you were talking about how these days footy is big business. I mean, you run a really big enterprise. So when you go from one big business to another, do you get a good hearing?
Absolutely. I think it really resonates with people. It really does. People want to help, but someone has to actually go there and leverage that help. Yeah, and that's the challenge. Once people learn about the issues, no one wants to see anyone in Melbourne, the most livable city in the world, sleeping rough. It's crazy. So that resonates with people. It's just a matter of doing the work, I guess.
Another idea I'd like to put to the panel, which is, because it is Homelessness Week, there at the moment in Melbourne is a Welsh academic who's visiting, and he's talking and advocating, his name's Dr. Peter Mackie, if you want to look him up at all. He's advocating for a homelessness prevention law, which actually exists in Wales. And this is an extraordinary law. What it actually means is that under the legislation, local government is responsible for funding and providing the services that prevent homelessness. So we're talking about services that would prevent evictions, so you could have tenant-landlord, communications and mediations and that sort of thing. And then if someone does become homeless, it is the job of the local government to find them a place to stay under legislation. And it's had an extraordinary success in Wales. The number of people accessing crisis accommodation has gone down dramatically. And I wonder whether, is that one of, I was alluding before to the fact that there are all these services. Is part of it that maybe we should make local government responsible, legally responsible? Of course, they would need to be funded to be able to do it. But at least then, it wouldn't be... I mean, Anthony, we have a very ad hoc approach to funding of this issue, particularly preventative funding, don't we?
We do, especially preventative, and even to talk about the staff first. We always seem to be in a pilot. Every bit of funding is a pilot program, so we have staff members that are always on a 1-year contract or a 2-year contract. 3-year contracts are pretty rare, and so you're always preparing for what's going to happen with your staff team. And they're the same people that have got the relationship with the homeless people that we're working with, and so the funding needs to be permanent, and it needs to be solid, and it needs to have less strings attached. The sort of the administrative and reporting processes of some monies that we get from a variety of places. I'm not talking about Melbourne City Council here, I'm talking about in all sorts of level of government, it's disproportionate to the amount of money that we receive. And that can be sometimes frustrating.
What do you think of a law?
I think of the law as an amazing idea. I've read about it before, and I think it'll work because they're the lawmakers, they're not lawbreakers, and I think they would be compliant to the law, so which means you couldn't be homeless. Although we still have human rights laws that exist here that already say that everyone has the right to housing and a shelter. And,
but I guess it's the responsibility, isn't it? It's tying it to a specific entity that is legally responsible.
Yes. Yeah, I would vote for it tenfold, yes.
Margaret?
Yeah, I think it's only part of the answer, to be honest. I really believe that you can put someone in a house, put a roof over their head and 4 walls around them, lovely furniture and a flat screen TV on the wall, and they can be completely alone. And I don't think that's the sort of society we want. We want to be able to wrap services around people. We want to be able to create compassionate communities. We want to be able to have people who have lived rough or insecurely or tenuously tell us what they need. As it was said to me earlier this week, if you need to understand what's wrong with your healthcare system, what's wrong even with your hospital, this was much more direct to me and to our hospital, you only have to ask the service users. And in this context, we only have to ask the people who present to us who have no home.
Thank you. There is that is an important part. It's certainly Magpie Nest's. It's almost on equal footings of getting the shelter is involving people. So we used to say that we've got lots of volunteers, hundreds actually, thousands I think. That's Phoebe, probably thousands, and we do keep a special place in those volunteer opportunities for our Magpie Nesters. They've got Scotty in the front row. Put your hand up, Scotty. He just spent the last 2 months cleaning our close-up room downstairs, but just spending the meticulous time. But he was part of our staff team. He's always been part of our team, but Scotty's part of the team, and he sort of goes, has his lunch break with everyone, and all of that. Otherwise, you'd be sitting in your room watching Oprah, if she's still on, Oprah? No, but hoping, last time I had a holiday they were, but it was, they have sitting there lonely and isolated, but anyone that needs to get involved, come in and volunteer, we say, and it's not the labour, like I think some other, sometimes people outside say, well, I think they make them work for it's nothing to do with the work, Scotty's done an extraordinary job, but there's others that come in and just completely muck the whole kitchen up, but at least they've had fun doing it, and they've annoyed the chef and they've had a conversation about it, and they've sort of enjoyed themselves, and that's about bringing people in together. And Collingwood, I don't think it'll be written in any contract, but it's conditional, our funding from Collingwood, to make sure people are involved and feel like they're part of the team.
David, that's definitely part of it? Because in fact, I can sort of juxtapose 2 different funding models here, and I know that they're for different stages, if you like, but there's been a lot of press lately. I'm going to mispronounce the name. Someone will be able to correct me. Is it Osmond House? Osmond House. So Osmond House, I know those amazing, they've done an amazing renovation of Osmond House, which has been around for a long time. And that is a high rise, and people can go and they can get an ensuite room and they can shut their door, and that's incredibly important for people. But if you're talking about being lonely, I would have thought that, that serves to isolate further. So that's more about crisis than community. Community is really important, Dave.
Absolutely, and I know people talk about getting people out of the city, decentralising homelessness, which is an interesting issue. So what we're trying to do is put homes in local communities near shops and near public transport where people can, be part of the local community out there. It all hinges, though, at the end of the day around the caseworkers. So the real heroes of this are the caseworkers and the people that provide those services. And
that's expensive. I mean, bottom line, you've got to travel around as opposed to just going to one-stop shop.
I find I don't understand why it's so hard for governments to fund caseworkers. they'll fund a building and they'll do all sorts of things, but because it's recurrent funding, I think how many caseworkers are there, Anthony? 6 do we have? 6. My God, if you double the number, I'm sure we would have less people on the streets.
And are they on a permanent contract or? No. So that's rolling funding?
Yeah. Some of them are on permanent contracts and some of them are on rolling funding. State government funding is a rolling contract, and we've got recurring funding.
So state government funding's rolling contract and then there's recurring funding. But you're still in a position where, you haven't got security of tenure, if I can put it that way.
No, and they're working incredible hours and incredible conditions, but I sometimes think if we just had more caseworkers, we'd have a lot less people on the streets. But anyway.
And then you get people out of Osmond House and into...
Say something about Osmond House, Ellie? So I just wanted to mention about Osmond House, there'll be people in here who are familiar too with the rebuild opposite the Children's Hospital. 10 floors, 134 self-contained rooms of different standards. So independent living units, there are 26. Imagine you're over 50 years old, you've been homeless for years and years and years, or tenuously housed, and then all of a sudden you've got your own most magnificent bedroom, lounge room, dining room, your own bathroom. Your own bathroom where you can have a shower in private. It's a remarkable thing. Then they've got more than double that of transition units. They're also self-contained. And then the crisis accommodation has its own bathroom, their studios, but doesn't have a TV. And that's deliberate on their model of care strategy to get people out and accessing the services that are on the hub down below. It's a great, it's a wonderful construct and a way to really treat people with, I think, 3 words: dignity, dignity and dignity. It's great.
And the council, I know, are also involved in trying to encourage build to rent, which is another stage, but it's part of that supply of affordable accommodation.
That's right, Ali. Look, I just think the distinction between public housing and social housing is very, very important. One of my big bugbears is that there's a lot of public housing around, and in fact I did ask the state government this question: when was the last time you did a review of who your clients are in those public housing units? I walk past 2 sets of towers each morning, and some of the people I see coming out of there are pretty well dressed, driving reasonably late model cars, and they're looking at it now, but I believe that if a review was done of public housing, and rather than using these people, as was the comment that was made, as Vicky would recall at the meeting, using these people as aspirational or as role models for the others, I believe that a review needs to happen. If we can release 10 to 20 units from each public housing tower to social housing, therein lies a pretty darn good solution. And we have 279 at last street count, June last year. We had 279 people sleeping on the streets of Melbourne. It's not counting the inner area, but just Melbourne CBD. So, and in fact, in the CBD area, that number it had declined by 15%. To the previous, it's done every 2 years. So there's a decline of 15%. In June 2018. However, so let's just say we've got 280 people living on the streets in Melbourne, and if we were to look at 10 or 5 or 10 towers, then we could start looking at a model where we could be releasing some units for people who really need it, who are in crisis, and also not just educating, but giving people who have made it, who've been there for 10, 15, 20 years, and their children are now living there.
There is a reality, though, here that we have to acknowledge, don't we, Anthony? And that is that of those 280 people sleeping rough, not everyone wants to be put into a house.
No, there is a small group that do say have made a choice to sleep rough. Maybe it's not their choice. Sometimes it's their traumatic childhood. Maybe it's their current mental health status, and they're saying they're really putting up the barriers to it. But that's of that street count. There was 170 of those people were sleeping downstairs. Were counted in that street count. So, and it's still we don't say that's an acceptable place to stay. That's just as tough as sleeping on the street, except it's warm. And it's safer, but it's still it's not a solution to us. We don't look at the 170 people sleeping side by side downstairs. Sorry to steal the Collingwood phrase, side by side together. But they were sitting there. That's not an acceptable place to end homelessness. And ending homelessness is in a functional house with good support around it, and you're part of the community. So it's but yeah, those numbers I think were interesting in the street count, where I was doing a lot of them under bridges and it was a bit scary that night actually, but anyway, under bridges and looking around in the bushes and things of the outskirts of the city. And I met Beverly on when we were out and about, but it was it was just those people that are sleeping really remotely have often chose to hide from life.
I'm going to open this up to the floor for questions in just one tick. Just one more question, and Anthony, it's for you, because I'd like to talk stats for a minute about Magpie Nest, and there are some extraordinary numbers around the success and the value for money that's been calculated in various studies. But as I understand it, since 2013, the average length of stay is 370 days. So that's obviously more than a year. 12% have transitioned into independent living, 15% have been engaged in employment, 8% have been enrolled in education. And I completely take the point that 1% is an achievement. But what I want to know is what happened to all the rest?
In reference to employment?
Well, yeah. What happened to the 85% that didn't get a job, the 92% who haven't enrolled in education, and the 88% who haven't gone to independent living?
There's a large percentage of them are on disability support pensions, so they can participate in work activities like volunteering, but they have been deemed by the department as unable to be employed. So the disability support pension is a group of people that are particularly vulnerable. And we have a group of people that have got a very acute mental illnesses that are going to stay with them for many, many years, for life. So that's where the average length of stay you mentioned was 370 days, so over a year. Comparable models are currently tracking at about 10 weeks. And that's because we're saying to people that you can actually live in that property forever. It can be your forever home. Maybe the property may change if an investor decides to sell his property, but you can actually stay in the program permanently. Although we were talking earlier with Trev, if we've got a young person that just has a dip in life, or was travelling along well, halfway through an apprenticeship, got on the ice, they found themselves homeless, ended up in our property, we'd say you've got the property for 6 months and I want you to work with this worker, and we want to get you working really hard to get you back employed, living back with your family and out of the system. So not everyone, others, but I don't know, Scotty, it's like, how long do you reckon you'll be there? Yeah, he's keen to have his own place one day, but Scotty could live with us for as long as he likes. So he's had 3-4 years with us, and he'll travel along until he gets a job, and then he'll want to move out. But it's sort of it's different for everyone. But I think that disability support pension is the key reason where people are unemployable, because we've got wonderful offers for jobs. Bunnings got behind the program for a long time, and they were bringing people in by stealth, not sort of marching them in as Magpie Nest tenants or people with a lived experience. Not that there's anything embarrassing about it, but they were letting them decide to tell their own story if they wished to. They joined them up with a social club. They have a special arrangement with the manager and myself where they could come and say, I've got a couple of court dates I haven't finished, so I'm not going to be at work next Wednesday and Thursday, and they'd have those days being put aside, but not sort of over the speaker, Russell's going to court today, Russell to court. It was done much more privately.
But it sounds to me like, David, it's just as well that you raised an extra $1 million this week, because you're going to need it.
We will.
You need a lot more houses, don't you?
We do.
That's the challenge at the moment for us. When we started finding 3-bedroom houses, which is our model, at around 400 to 450 a week, was easy. We're in Preston Reservoir. We're finding it harder and harder to find homes that the demands are huge. We're out at Deer Park now, we're out at Sunbury, but it's getting harder and harder, and we just got to keep going. There's 170 people on the floor. We need to find places for them, and then, as you say, transition into independent living, of course. But yeah, we just need more houses.
David, you said earlier, talked about corporations, and I think we need to tap into baby boomers. I just think there's a whole group of us who have done reasonably well in life and who really do care. And, in fact, my councillor colleague, Jackie Watts, as well, said this to me the other day. If I was approached and I have an investment house, I would consider giving that house up for a year, maybe. And if it's working really well, for 2, maybe 3 years. And, in fact, that's exactly what I'm thinking of doing as well. What landlords want is a guaranteed rent, so we guarantee the rent. We've never
So it's not a freebie. I mean, you're paying a return.
We've never lost a house to an incident, and I think that's the first thing. Landlords go, oh, who's going to be in my house? What are they going to do? But we've never lost one house through poor behaviour. In actual fact, what we find is by showing respect and treating people with dignity, they treat the property the same way.
That's exactly right. That's the key point. See, this property, you're moving to a property that's well set up, and we've got Pam Lamaro, who comes in, and she's got a touch of the grand design. So she's got all this thing going, that wall needs a wall hanging. Hang on, no, that brown's not going to go with that, or that black with not that, but that white.
So not everything is black and white.
No. So she sets them up beautifully. Now what you see is the guys keep them really, really well, and we're not treating people like children, so we're not coming in and doing dust checks on them, but they keep them well because it's the first time they've been able to bring maybe their adult children over for lunch Sunday, and not into a boarding house where they're worried they're going to bump into someone they don't want to see, or so they bring them over. They sometimes say to the guys, can you guys go out for the day? So we'll give movie tickets to one group, they'll take off, someone has their family over. So getting them back into be house proud has been the most important part of what Magpie Nest can achieve through Collingwood Foundation, because they're very, very house proud, and that's because we have good, it's not just the quality of the furniture, but it's the cleanliness of the property, all sorts of things.
Yeah, and when we started, we were trying to be an alternative to rooming houses.
Yes.
That were in deplorable conditions, and I know Trev spent some time in a rooming house, I believe, when you first started. Yeah. And I don't know what the situation is now, Anthony, but when you talk about legislation and things, rooming houses, it's pretty loose, and they're often run by some pretty interesting people.
Trev, tell us the story of the rooming house. You grab the mic.
Yeah, it was in Coburg, and there were 7 of us living in the one house, and the oven went. And we contacted the people, they came out and they said they couldn't afford to give us a new oven.
There's 8 of you paying what a week?
8 of you were contributing to the rent?
Yeah, 180 a week they were taking off us, and off each person, and they said they couldn't afford. And like, people, we had to close the lounge room off so 2 people could sleep there, and there was the back patio, people were sleeping out there, and it was just terrible, really. But
I visited that property and many others, but so we didn't do business with criminals, and that's what people take away, but it was hard not to when you were finding some rooming house groups. So we'd have criminal entities, we all know they were. Vicky would know some of the ones down that I'm thinking of, and we're sort of going to that person to say, look, can we get someone into your room and pay 180, which right now is at about $230 a week for a boarding house room, and that's where there's no safety, no real security. Often have a dealer that lives on site, so that dealer can help you thrive in your drug habit. It's sort of difficult to cut yourself away from it. Those conditions, standover tactics for our vulnerable, sort of intellectually disabled or mentally unwell, so their medication gets stolen, their money can get taken. That stuff. When I say it doesn't happen in Magpie Nest, it just, if it rears its head ever in terms of medication or standover tactics, it's stamped out really quickly, because you've got 2 other mates with you in the house, and they think, well, how are you talking to us like that? And they come back to us. We've had those meetings. You've been in those 3-way meetings? we have three. You know, we have a house meeting. Really, we iron out problems. If they're really serious, we've got a way to handle it. But we have those ones when there's just small disputes. You know, get everyone together. Someone's not pulling their weight in the house. It's the same stuff that we all would have gone through when we lived in shared accom when we were younger. It's the same issues arise, but we iron them out together. Yeah.